bicuspid valve, then we're in the left ventricle, then we pass through good aortic semilunar valve, out through the aorta, then the arteries and arterioles. This is what we call respiratory gas transport. We're really just transporting the blood gases around the body in the body's blood vessels. So what you learned back in chapter 18 that we called systemic flow through arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules, and veins, bringing you back up to the heart, all that stuff is just respiratory gas transport. So one of those 5 blood vessels, arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules, and veins, which one of those is the important one for gas exchange at the body?
Capillaries.
Capillaries. Okay, so again, here we're back to a capillary. Again, we're doing gas exchange. Why can't we do gas exchange across the wall of an artery or a vein? Too thick. Yeah, both of them have too many layers, too thick to do diffusion. So we are now doing internal respiration. This is the gas exchange that occurs with your body cells and tissues. Notice this time we're going to flip-flop the movement of those gases. In the lungs, we were loading oxygen and unloading carbon dioxide. But notice here in the internal respiration, we're loading CO2 into the bloodstream while we're unloading oxygen out into the surrounding cells and tissues. Capillaries are built for this because they are simple squamous, so diffusion can very easily occur across those single cell layers. So don't worry about all of this chemical reaction mess. We'll come to that later on in our acid-base discussion. But for now, we'll just understand that oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged with the surrounding cells and tissues. All right, so of course diffusion works on the basis of a concentration gradient. So since we're unloading oxygen from the bloodstream into the surrounding cells and tissues, where's your highest concentration of oxygen? In the capillaries, good. Since we're loading carbon dioxide from cells and tissues into the bloodstream, where's the highest concentration of CO2?
Tissue.
Cells and tissues, right. So the cells and tissues have the higher concentration of CO2. Notice that we're always moving these blood gases from areas of higher concentration to lower concentration. So that's why oxygen is unloading into the surrounding cells and tissues, while carbon dioxide is being loaded into the blood gas for transportation. We'll come back to this in just a few minutes because we're going to talk about exactly how we transport these gases. There's a couple of different mechanisms for it. For now, do you have any questions here on page 78?
Okay, so external respiration is moving from the alveoli to the capillaries?
If you're talking oxygen, because if it's CO2, you're moving capillaries into the alveolus. Is that what you're asking?
Can you say that one more time?
Sure. But what she's asking is in the lungs, if you're talking alveolus to capillary, that's oxygen. But if you're talking capillary into the alveolus, that's CO2. It depends what direction you're moving.
Oxygen?
It's loaded. It's coming from the alveolus into the capillary. Did you get your 4 blanks filled in there on page 78? Okay, any questions on those blanks? Page 79 is pulmonary ventilation. In other words, it's how you breathe in and out. And pulmonary ventilation is on page 726 of your textbook. They also devote an entire exercise on the IP10 to pulmonary ventilation. So if you want to go home and walk yourself through it, do take a look at that IP10. All right, to understand how this stuff works, we have to have a little quick physics lesson. And you'll notice here that we've got Boyle's law. Boyle's law is based on volume and pressure differences. We say that volume and pressure are inversely proportional. If one goes up, the other goes down. That makes it real simple to figure out what's going on. Take a look at what they're showing us here. They start off on the far left over here with a container that has a large volume. Okay, a lot of room for that gas to amble around and bounce against those walls. The pressure here is low because you'll see that these molecules aren't really squeezed together. So when volume is high, pressure is low. Okay, so there again reminds us this is an inversely proportional process. Watch what happens when they start to change the volume. Now the volume is very small, and those gases don't have a whole lot of room to ramble at all. So the gases are really crammed together tightly in that space. If you cram those gases together, now pressure does what? Increases. So as volume decreases, pressure is going to increase. Again, this is inversely proportional, meaning if one goes up, the other automatically goes down. That makes keeping this stuff straight rather easy. As long as you can figure out what one of the items is doing, the other is automatically the opposite. Think about your lungs in a way like balloons, because the same process is what a balloon experiences. If you inflate a balloon, it has a lot of volume, it has room for that air to meander about. But if you start taking a balloon that you blew up and cramming that balloon together, you know that that pressure is going to rise inside. Luckily for us, we have an escape route for the air that starts to increase in pressure. If you increase the pressure inside the thoracic cavity, the automatic escape route is to push it up and out of our nasal cavity. So of course we exhale the air if the pressure gets too great in our thoracic cavity. I want to show you here a couple of muscles that are important for breathing. We all know about the diaphragm, right? This is an odd view of the diaphragm. This is laying, down near the bladder and looking up toward the diaphragm, so it's looking superiorly in this picture. You can see poking through the diaphragm, there are a couple of old friends. There's the IVC, there's the esophagus coming through. So the diaphragm is meant to be a muscle that works both under voluntary and under involuntary control. And it sits like a dome separating your thoracic cavity from your abdominopelvic cavity. When this muscle contracts, it goes from a dome-shaped view and it pushes down against your stomach. So when it contracts, it essentially makes a higher volume inside your thoracic cavity. Increase the volume, do what to the pressure? Decrease it. If you decrease pressure to the outside world, you automatically you suck air in. So if you push that diaphragm down, it's like a pump. It literally pulls or sucks air into your lungs. Of course it doesn't sound like that, because if you have a normal respiratory system, a healthy one, then you don't hear a sucking sound as the air is pulled into your lungs. But in effect, you're working like a vacuum cleaner, sucking air in if that diaphragm pushes down toward your stomach. So you can see here, as these lungs inflate, watch how that diaphragm does push inferiorly. That's part of how we can breathe in or inspire. Another part of it, I'll get you a different picture here, are the muscles that actually hold our ribs together. Those intercostal muscles also can contract, and when they can cage and flare it out. So we actually have a couple of sets of muscles that help us breathe in. The diaphragm moves from a dome down, and your rib muscles contract, flaring out your rib cage. So if you want to experience that, you can put your hands here in your rib cage, take a deep breath of air, and then feel how your rib cage flares out on you. There's also accessory breathing muscles. Back when you studied Bio 210, you might have heard of sternocleidomastoid here in the neck and trapezius and these around the neck area. They're what we call accessory muscles. They're only used if necessary, but they're essentially helping muscles if you need help breathing in or breathing out. So the main two sets of muscles involved in breathing in are the intercostals and the diaphragm. The job of breathing in involves increasing the volume in your thoracic cavity and decreasing the pressure in your thoracic cavity. So again, you can see with this animation, Notice what the diaphragm does when it says air in. The diaphragm contracts and moves inferiorly. They're not showing us the rib cage, but that does contract and move outward, so you can increase the volume and decrease the pressure. I want to draw your attention to the bottom of the page down there. Air pressure at sea level. I'm not talking inside your body right now. I'm just talking air pressure at sea level is 1 atmosphere. Now, we also work off of a different number. We work off of millimeters of mercury pressure. That should be a familiar measurement for us. But notice at sea level, we're looking at changes somewhere around 760 millimeters of mercury pressure. 760 equals 1 atmosphere at sea level. I make this point to you because if you check out that chart on the bottom of your page, notice that it says inspiration, intercostals and diaphragm muscles contract. The pressure in the lung decreases to around 759. Obviously, 759 is less than 760. Where does air move? In, right? So that decrease in pressure causes air to flow into your lungs. We're moving from an area of higher pressure outside your body to a lower pressure inside your body. So that's what actually sucks air into our bodies, is the decrease in pressure due to the change in volume and pressure inside your lungs.
So are those the internal and external intercostals? Both sets?
I think it's specifically the internals that are involved in the contraction. The externals, I believe, are the expiration process.
Okay.
I might have that backwards though. Notice what has to happen in order for you to exhale. Exhalation is also called expiration. Always sounds like your very last breath out, doesn't it? But both of those processes involve you removing air from your lungs, and again, it's a pressure issue. Notice what happens when the diaphragm relaxes. It returns back up to a dome-shaped appearance. It protrudes up against your lungs, and it pushes the air inside of your lungs out. The rib muscles here, these intercostals, also relax, so your rib cage comes from a flared standpoint back down to a relaxed state. That also helps to push the air out of your lungs. Exhalation is completely passive. That means no ATP, no work on your body's behalf is required unless you're forcibly exhaling air. Most of you sitting there at the desk right now are probably doing what we call passive expiration or passive exhalation. There's no ATP necessary for you to exhale. All it takes is for these muscles to do what? Relax. Just relax. Diaphragm relaxes. It pokes back up in a point, kind of in a dome shape. The intercostal muscles also relax. So that in turn will do what to the volume inside your thoracic cavity? Decreases the volume. Anytime you decrease volume, you do what to pressure? Increase the pressure. So since the pressure, you'll notice in your worksheet, increases to a slightly higher number than atmospheric pressure, it's going to, of course, push that air up and out of your lungs. So that's the process of breathing. It's just pressure and volume changes. It depends on the contraction and relaxation of your diaphragm and intercostal muscles. And keep in mind what we just got through talking about. We talked about the pleura, and those